Hello, y'all. We welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts Bernhard and Laura Matsu. And this topic for this episode is a question we've being asked a lot, and a lot of people are concerning themselves. It is about how can I help the world during these times? And this question really arises because there's this ongoing splitting, so to speak, which you see with everything that's happening in the world, people buying into the official story, other people speaking out about truth against the vaccination agenda, for example, in all of that. And we see the splitting. We have talked about this in previous episodes within our circles of friends and families, and there can be a lot of friction and whatnot. And naturally, we don't want our loved ones to suffer. And we want to help them. We want to, quote unquote, wake them up, to see the truth as well. And all of that in this sea of disinformation, misinformation, lies, and propaganda we are being subjected to by official culture, the mainstream media, and the medical mafia, pharmaceutical cartel, and all of that, what's happening in the world right now. So we really want to go deeper into the question, how can I help the world during these times? And what does it really mean to help and spread awareness and help others awaken, and what needs to be considered?
Yeah, so I guess the first question I would offer people to ask themselves is, are you in the position to help others, for starters? Because to help others, you really have to have, almost like an overflow of energy that you can provide to be of service to your community, to the people around you. So what this means to me personally and the people I work with is like, where is this person at with their self-work? Are they ready to step into a position of being of service to others? Meaning, have they worked on their own triggers? Have they cleared up enough of their emotional body that they feel that they're in a position? And have they worked on their own trauma? Because the more that they've really helped themselves, and the more that they feel grounded in their own essence, and the more they feel grounded in who they truly are, the better position they are to help others. And that's not a judgment. It's just, where are you at with your own healing? It doesn't mean you have to be completely like 100% like healed or whatever, enlightened or something in order to help others. It means you have to be at a certain point of security where you can do that and not have it be draining on you, and be able to, take on the extra task, because it is extra work to help others. We're also, collectively, we're processing, even somatically as well, a trauma that happened last year when all of these lockdowns took place, and the impact it's had on our, maybe our livelihoods. It's on our emotional health, on our physical health, on our spiritual health. So I think that's the first question to ask is like, have you adequately processed what's happened this year? Do you have a great self-care regime, a great, daily routine that helps you support you in processing that?
Yeah. And also, in regards to the inner work and also information, what kind of, the external work, so to speak, of seeking truth, that discerning truth from lies and what's really going on and whatnot. If we share information in order to help awaken others or help others in general. But, what you just shared reminds me also, again, I can see it in my own life. We need to be able to help ourselves first before we can help others. And that's not necessarily, like you said, it's not selfish or anything in that sense. And doesn't mean that you have to heal everything and be enlightened, like you just said, to help others, but be in the right position, so to speak. It reminds me always, on the plane when you go through the safety regulations and whatnot, when they talk about the masks falling from the ceiling, that you have to put on the mask first before you help somebody else. So you need to be in the right position to help others first, basically, right? Exactly.
And it actually relates, like service-orientated work relates to Virgo. It relates to the sixth house. We all have a sixth house in our astrology, so we all have certain gifts that we have to offer to help others. And the key point of any self-development that we do in the sixth house is about developing humility, basically, And so by looking at ourselves, by analyzing ourselves, by trying to become a better person, we actually become better at being of service to others. So I'm going to just read off some keywords as well from Patricia Walsh, A Great Evolutionary Astrology, where she talks about sixth house, Virgo, aspects. So sixth house is the work that you're meant to do in the world. If you look at your astrology, and if anyone has an astrologer they work with or they know how to read their own chart, you want to look at your sixth house to kind of see the work that you're meant to offer others. So it is related to being of service. It's also about being an apprentice. So just, understanding that you're on this journey, you're learning as you go along, you're developing skills to be of service to others. And it's developing humility, basically. But on the opposite side of that, it can also turn into, humiliation, basically, and being self-sacrificing yourself and questing for perfection that can never be reached as well. So it's kind of a fine line, we'll never be perfect in a sense, but at the same time, we already are perfect in the eyes of the divine. So it's about that quest to wanting to be a better person, what it comes down to. And through our self-development, we find our place in society, we learn different self-improvement techniques, we improve our health, it actually creates a bit of a crisis when we start to realize that we have a lot of work to do on ourselves, and there is things that we need to work on. And that's where we develop this humility.
Can I share something about that?
Yeah.
Because what I realized in my own life, I've been always wanting to help others, being of service naturally. It's been kind of encoded within me. Also, people naturally always came to me seeking advice and disclosing very, personal information, because maybe the way I carry myself or whatever my energetic makeup is, in the sense I'm able to hold space, right, for people and whatnot. But what I've also realized is that, the more I did self-work on myself, digging deep within my own shadow, going back to basic childhood wounding, trauma work, and all of that, basic psychological somatic work, even spiritual work, which when you do it sincerely, it definitely had to eat humble cake a lot of times, because it is the big lesson is humility, which, by the way, is not too mistaken for self-diminishment.
Because the shadow side of Virgo is being self-critical to the point where it's no longer useful. So we all have areas of our life
which I can relate to.
Yeah,
as well.
Exactly. That's the main Virgo wound, is almost like being self-diminishing and being critical to the point where it actually turns into type of masochism, basically.
Yeah.
That's the very strong inner critic. So at the same time, we also have to kind of jump at a certain point and be like, I'm not perfect, but this is what I am good at. And that's where I can help others.
And actually knowing your strengths and knowing your limitations as well.
Exactly.
That's a true sincerity, being honest with yourself first and foremost. Yeah. Being sincere with yourself. Even I remember Adyashanti talking about it, even Gurdjieff, it's not too much even being sincere with others. You have to be really sincere with yourself before you can truly relate to somebody else on a deeper level. Mm-hmm. But what I was getting at, the more, the deeper working with myself, confronting my own stuff, shadow, all of that, what I just mentioned, and it's ongoing work. And I realized, wow, I've so much work to do on myself. And then you realize, the more I see my own wounds and traumas, which were unconscious before, the more I see it in other people.
Yeah.
Right? And the way I see it is, I see people suffering, but they don't know that they're suffering.
Yeah.
Right? They're still armored up, so to speak, with defense mechanism, bodily armor and whatnot, dissociation, trauma, and all of that, plugged into the matrix, living very mechanically under the illusion of free will, because they're driven by unconscious wounds and traumas, which then trigger, certain behaviors, actions, and decisions.
Yeah.
But it's not truly coming from essence. It's just their conditioned, wounded personality, so to speak. So, that's why also in regards to helping others, it's not as simple as just giving advice of what they should be doing and whatnot. This intellectual way of trying to convince people, and we have talked about this before, if it would be just about sharing information and then people realize, oh, of course, that's true, then we would have been quote unquote enlightened long time ago.
Yeah.
But then cognitive dissonance kicks in, unconscious defense mechanism, because once you, again, on the path of seeking truth, right? A lot of people, let's take real life examples right now, what's happening in the world. If people would just acknowledge one little thing that's happening in the world, for example,
it could take down their whole reality, basically.
Exactly. I always give the best example, classic example, 9/11 was inside job, or at the very least, you can, if you're really sincere and logical, you can at least see that the official story doesn't hold true by any stretch of the imagination. There's something off about it.
Yeah.
Right. But if somebody would then acknowledge, oh my God, this might have been inside job, the government was behind it, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Just not some external Islamic enemy. then they would have to maybe admit, okay, the government is actually not in place for the people. There, we're being lied to. There's a lot of corruption and whatnot. And if they would have to acknowledge that, then they may have to acknowledge other things.
Yeah, but then
right?
also...
So it's a chain reaction. Then there's a defense mechanism comes in, because then, like you just said, they will have to put the mirror on themselves.
Yeah, but then again, it's really important that helping others is not just giving information.
Exactly.
And the main thing to notice there is there needs to be some level of consent. So I can take myself, for example. Once I learned some really great somatic modalities, I mean, you experienced that. I just wanted to practice it on people all the time, and would try to get them into processes that they did not really officially consent to. So context is really important, because we may have a gift to offer others, but don't just offer it to random people on Facebook, who aren't interested in that. We have to also look at the context, that's really important, because especially when working with people one-on-one, what I've noticed is something that could be medicine for one person could actually be harmful for another person. Even just information about their astrology chart or things that I'm seeing in them, or repetitive, compulsive patterns that they have. What may work for one person may not work for another. So we have to also look at the individual in front of us, and then also understand context too,
That's a very important point, which I also realized in my journey of working on myself, seeking truth, helping others, working with others one-on-one, or the group courses with the group work we do together. What I've also realized, I had to acknowledge, as you just mentioned, that what works for one may not work for another, right? And also what works for me may not necessarily work for another.
Yes.
So I have to also really learn to not just project onto others, tell them what to do because it just worked for me. Because everybody is such a unique individual with different soul lessons, different psychological makeup, different trauma and whatnot. Yes, there are general quote-unquote rules of how to process, but again, everybody's soul journey is different. And what you hinted at is also like understanding universal law of free will, not to infringe on free will, not to give without being asked. That's literally an esoteric law. Only give when it's asked for. And the asking has to be sincere. It's not just verbally, right? So as you mentioned, don't give unsolicited advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of people jump,
that could be harmful to people, basically.
Exactly.
Even information can be harmful to people. Like if you have someone, if you're outspoken like we are, and you're sharing information about vaccines or anything that goes contrary to the official narrative, I'm sure many people who do that are used to people hopping on there and getting very triggered. In this case, have they asked you, have they consented to get into to have their beliefs questioned if we start doing that, because people protect their beliefs unconsciously. Because they're usually protecting something bigger there for them to look at. And if we don't have at least a consent and also right context on Facebook, on social media is not a good place to process with people, then it's not going to work out 99% of the time in my experience. Yeah. So we have to have that consent. We also have to have context, and discernment is also a sixth house lesson, is like we have to be able to make the right calls and be like, okay, I can help this person. This criticism is valid, either internal or external. This criticism is someone's projection. Discernment is a really key lesson that we need to develop in order to be of service to others, because it will help us discern when to be of service to others and who we can help, basically. Because we can't help everyone. That's the main thing, is you could be the most amazing healer in the world, have the most amazing skill set, have great progress with some people. And then some people you can't. And it's nothing personal. It's nothing against you. It's nothing to beat yourself up about. It's just that I feel each person has specific medicine for a certain amount of people. Like I have specific medicine for people who have gone through similar journeys that I have. And so do you, And so we need to also be careful when we give that medicine out, so that we're not literally poison. We can actually do harm to people with the same medicine that we just gave to someone else.
We can basically infringe on somebody's soul lesson.
Yes.
Sometimes people need to go struggle or even suffer to learn a certain soul lesson. It's similar. I like to give the analogy when you raise a child, you teach a child, a very young child, how to ride a bicycle. You don't hold the bicycle all the time. Sometimes at some point you have to let go and the kid might fall down and whatnot. This is part of the lesson, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. But really what it comes down to, what you just mentioned, reminds me really of other esoteric concepts in regards to respecting free will, and two concepts which Gurdjieff talked about, which is external consideration and strategic enclosure. Mm-hmm. And I wrote about this in more depth in my essay, The Perilous Path Towards Awakening. And there's also, I give a talk on that. It's in the video section on my website, veilofreality.com, on the traps towards awakening. And one of the traps is the trap of wanting to help others, which sounds very counterintuitive because, of course, we want to and should help others. But, as we also see, even from when we work with others, and maybe our listeners know out of personal experiences, you can only help someone who's willing to help themselves, number one, right? You cannot force it onto others.
Yeah.
And then external consideration really means to have it, like you mentioned, through your own self, like a certain level of being and awareness to really relate to a person, to read a person correctly, to know where they're at and meet them where they're at, right? Instead of like imposing yourself onto it and dropping knowledge bonds and trying to argue and all of that, but to adjust to their worldview, to their beliefs. And some people are not ready for certain knowledge. We need to respect that, or certain information, unless they're sincerely asked and whatnot.
Exactly.
So that's number one. But this external consideration requires a certain level of being, which you only achieve through sincere self-work, bringing forth your own essence, so you can really, your vision or your perception not clouded with your own stuff, which you project onto others. Right?
Yeah, that's also this kind of skill to like apprentice in at anything that you're good at doing, is being able to read the person, see where they're at, and adjust whatever, help you're offering them to that person. That's really a skill, because even when I learned astrology, I would read people's charts, and at some point I realized, like, wow, like some people are just not ready for some of the things that I'm noticing in their chart. And like, how can I adjust that? And then I had to really get to know the person and ask the questions, and then led me into like a more evolutionary astrology understanding of it, meaning like, each person has a different setup, but how they're responding to that setup is completely different. You don't know that until you talk to the person, and we really need to just respect and allow people to show us where they're at in the soul journey and accept them where they're at. It can be really hard when we have people who we feel are completely conditioned by mainstream media, and have probably, a lot of people who are very conditioned by it have not really done any sincere self-work on themselves, aside from the whole spiritual materialist community who seem like they've done self-work and then they just buy into the official story, which is another story. Right. But the general population, they're living their lives unconsciously. And to be honest, like, most of them are just operating in this herd mentality, and they don't think for themselves. They don't question for themselves. Generally speaking, these are the people you and I would never work with. They don't ever come to see us. They don't ever come to see therapists. They don't ever see something's wrong. They just use their own coping mechanisms and way of putting themselves to sleep in the daily world as a way to cope with it. They don't actually want to look deeper. In fact, it's usually some sort of like health crisis or a death or something that gives them the opportunity to start doing that. Doesn't mean they actually will make that choice. Yeah. But I've noticed that most people will not make that choice. They're kind of comfortable living with the status quo, going along with the herd. Even a major death in their life was not taken as an opportunity to awaken to something deeper within themselves. And I would say that's literally 80% of the population.
Yeah. And I want to go deeper into that, because I feel certain people are not even capable to do this deeper inner work in this lifetime around, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I want to go back real quick to this concept of external consideration we described. This ties into, again, what I mentioned before, strategic enclosure. And what that means, having basically a strategy of how to present information, right? Depending on context, situation, who you're talking to and whatnot, be it even social media or one-on-one. And because especially in one-on-one situations, sometimes it just does, as I mentioned before, it doesn't help to just drop knowledge bombs and read this and read that and forcing information onto others. Because if you reflect, speaking to the listeners here, putting a little mirror up, reflect on yourself. Nobody forced you to awaken. Nobody forced you to sit down and check out this information.
Yeah.
It came out of your own drive to understand, maybe out of only your suffering, Like you mentioned, suffering in that sense is the catalyst. And that's the deeper meaning of suffering. We talked about this before in the past podcast. But what we see happening in the world as more and more is coming up, how much longer do people need to suffer until they question? And because of, that's the almost the silver lining with the lockdown and everything, because it made a lot of people who would usually go along with everything also question, like, hold on, something is off about it. Over a year into this, we're still in lockdown, still all these draconian laws, something doesn't add up, right? And all of that. So people need to awaken. The seed needs to sprout within themselves.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And what does it mean on a practical level with strategic enclosure, for example, like spread some seeds of awareness, ask the person questions, instead of imposing anything onto them, right? And then see where it goes if they open it and trust your intuition. But again, it depends your own level of being and how much you're connected to essence to, make the right decision in a way of presenting or helping others to see maybe deeper truths.
And also, this work is not for the faint-hearted, because when you help others, you also have to be able to handle other people's projections, other people's triggers. If you're working in a client quote unquote therapist or your life coach relationship, you need to understand transference and how your childhood stuff can get triggered back on theirs. Transference being when, they project their own childhood stuff onto you, and then vice versa, and these are all critical skills, because it's like, when you go you're kind of going into the trenches when you try and help others, Yes, we should definitely help others who we've had the consent of and who come to us, but still it's not easy work. If you really want to go deep with people, you have to be able to handle their triggers as well, and your own triggers around other people's triggers. And that's a key skill that I don't see a lot of people, at least in the general population, practicing, and that's important because, and I remember we listened to this talk by Reggie Ray like years ago, where he's talking about the path of the Bodhisattva. And he was like, if they need you to be a toilet, you have to be a toilet. If they need you to be a bridge, you have to be a bridge, which is a famous poem, I think, by Shanti Deva, who is like a Bodhisattva saint. But basically the point is you need to actually be whoever they need in that moment, not what you want them to be, not where you think they should be. And that happens subtly as well, because also what I learned from Gabor Mate is a huge part of the healing process is we need to make sure we don't project our own agenda onto someone else, So even if someone comes to us for help, we can project our agenda of wanting them healed or wanting them to do something else, or being like, this relationship is bad for you. And that doesn't help them, So it's really a subtle art too of helping others. And that comes through knowing yourself and knowing your own stuff, because the more that you're able to do that. And by the way, just as a side note, a lot of therapists don't do that. That's why there are a lot of crappy therapists out there. But we need to be able to have that self-knowledge through developing true humility, knowing that we're not perfect, knowing that we can work on ourselves and make ourselves into better people in order to even enter that relationship to begin with. And on the flip side, as a lot of therapists don't have that skill of self-knowledge, there's also a lot of like coaches and, kind of people who work in the spiritual field who also do it from a point of, needing validation or needing to feel special or needing some sort of, they need something from you in return as well, So it's tricky territory out there when we enter. And the only thing that really keeps us on track is developing that humility as well.
It's similar, almost like spiritual bypassing, because the ego can hijack this whole concept of helping others or being STO, service to others, versus STS, and I'm of service and this and that. Not only because of, like you mentioned, having our own agenda, how we want certain things to be, but also because the ego likes to feel better, like, oh, I'm helping others. I'm better, like I'm a savior.
The virtue signaling.
The virtue signaling, exactly. Yeah. Or the savior, I'm going to help this person, that person. Yeah. And that can even take more egoic, even narcissistic measures in light of like showing off, on social media and all of that. Yeah. And like what great.
That's why you have a lot of narcissists who enter into the healing field, is because they want that validation. And what better way to get that validation than, oh my God, I'm a healer, Yeah. So that's one end of the spectrum. But then another side of the spectrum I've seen, which is also related to the Virgo archetype and being of service to others is a sense of inferiority. And that actually is also an ego response, is like, you know, constantly like, and I know because I have this, I actually have a south node in the 6th house, but it's like, no matter how much I help others, no matter how much I do, you know, I've had to work on this ongoing core wound of like never feeling like it's good enough. And why does it never feel like it's good enough? And I can speak from personal experience. And I think this also relates to a lot of people, is because a lot of people tend to get into the healing fields, or, you know, helping professions rather, because they wanted to help someone in their past that they weren't able to. And so then that creates this dynamic of like, you know, wanting to, when you're working with someone, your own stuff of finally helping that parent who you weren't able to help comes up as well. So that's another thing to look at. Like there's layers to it. And I actually think, you know, any client therapist relationship has to be a dynamic process, because it's natural for your own stuff to come up and you have to work with that, especially when you're just getting started as well. It's really important to understand your own childhood stuff and how that comes up in relational dynamics.
Yeah. And the best way also to help others is like we go back to is the archetypal journey of the wounded healer. To have healed yourself, to work through your own stuff, through experience, right? It's not just about getting book smart knowledge of reading books of all this kind of stuff and then help people like because of stuff you read. You know, the people I want to work with, like I need help. I need to have my coaches. I go to workshops, you know, and whatnot.
Yeah.
I need reflection healers. But the best people that have helped me is people who have gone through hell themselves and healed themselves out of their own experience.
Yeah.
Rather than just somebody with a 3-letter abbreviation behind their name, you know what I mean? Not to throw the baby with the bathwater, but it's really about personal experience.
Yeah. Well, that's who some people are looking for. Some people are looking for people who have that PhD. But for the most part, if you're listening to this podcast, you're actually looking for people who are more in this kind of holistic coaching realm, like us, you know, who we may not have the 3 letters behind our name, but we've gone through the experiences many people have gone through, and we've learned tools and tricks on working with that. So that's how I know that actually has given me a lot of confidence, more than going to school probably would, in myself, is because I know I've tried a lot of techniques. I've tried a lot of different things to try and heal myself, and I know what actually tends to work. You know, and for me, it's been the somatic trauma piece has been really huge, you know. So that's what I teach people, is now I've learned specific modalities that I can help people with. I can have confidence working with an array of people because I have a specific set of skills. Same with you in your body work, you know. It's like we have to also develop our toolkit as well. It's like, and the toolkit is not usually found in these like 3-month coaching programs that you can get now. The toolkit is like study things that you're passionate about. What has worked on you?
3-month course, meaning how to like coaching.
3-month course for coaching, you know,
becoming a life coach.
Coaching, coaching is a skill set where you know, instead of counseling, where you're more the empathic witness, you're more mirroring, you do give advice. You know, coaching is really a different vibe. It's a different flavor. It's like, this is solutions orientated. Here's a problem. Here's the next steps to solve it. You know, it's very proactive, and I like it better personally. Even though I do offer some counseling as well. But what I'm saying is that, you know, we need to also develop a skill set, and most good skill sets that you go through will have you practice it on yourself. Like that's key, and get work done on yourself, you know? So you become, you know, relates to the apprenticeship thing. I know a lot of people have realized through this craziness in the world that the job that they're working at is no longer aligned with them in some ways, you know? So a lot of people are at this kind of turning point, I've noticed, and they want to actually enter into a more service orientated field that's more in line with their own passions, you know, but they don't know where to start. But the first place to start is like, what are you passionate about? What are healing modalities that you would like to explore more in depth? And are you willing to go through that in depth yourself and work on them yourself? Like, don't just learn a skill set and then practice it on other people. Practice it on yourself, because there's a lot of different modalities out there, and you have to find the one that really works for you and that you think that you could be a good apprentice of as well. And I just want to add on to that, because that's a really important piece, because I kind of found my own way through somatic work, through my own kind of north node soul journey. My north node is in Taurus. So it's all about the embodiment process, you know? And so what I had to do was really I mean, it happened organically, by the way, which is a lot of the way that these things tend to happen, where I was just realizing that a lot of body-based meditations were really helping me, but they needed something else as well on top of it. So that's how I found compassion and inquiry and other somatic modalities. Then it realized it needed something else. So, it's through this apprenticeship, through realizing this quest for perfection is actually a really good driving force to develop ourselves and to develop our skill set, was what I'm trying to point out, Yeah. So we find these tools along the way, and by looking at things, by analyzing them, by asking them, how could they be better? How did that work? And developing that true humility to analyze ourselves, that's how we actually develop our craft.
Yeah, exactly. I can relate to this in my own journey as well. Also ties into the teacher appears when the student is ready, and a teacher doesn't necessarily has to be a person, but it's a modality, a book for something you're really drawn to, and it ties into follow your passion, following your bliss, as Joseph Campbell said.
Yeah,
right. It's something that excites you, and also the old cliche saying applies here too. You teach best what you need to learn yourself.
Yeah,
right. That's what it comes down to. Because I know myself, similar journey early 20 years ago with bodywork. One of my roommates was a massage therapist, body worker, and yoga teacher. He introduced me to all of that in the late 90s. And then I found a gift I didn't know I even have, like healing hands. It came easy to me. There's a talent towards it, right? And just because it comes easy to you doesn't mean that you don't have to work on it. Obviously, you need to develop a talent and work for it and learn more and all of that. And then one thing leads to another, right? Mm-hmm. Because of embodiment process and similar, again, evolutionary astrology helps a lot with that as well, because I have North Node in Aquarius and Sun in Aquarius. So for me, it's also the bigger picture topics, right? We are in the age of Aquarius, the whole craziness, conspiracy, and all of that, the inner and outer work, which also reminds me, somebody posted a couple of weeks ago on one of my Facebook posts that she had trouble finding nowadays therapists or coaches or anybody like doing deeper inner work who are also aware of what's happening in the world, right? So many, like even well-known, like I guess from the left, whatever, liberal type therapists, coaches, whatnot, even spiritual teachers and whatnot buy into the official story, go along with the lies, right? And a lot of people don't want to work with these people, because then they're afraid of being, gaslit, basically.
Yeah, and then the issue, and this is this is a whole other topic on its own, but you have a lot of mainstream therapists, because of their licensing, they're basically pushing critical race theory, as part of their therapy, so someone doesn't really buy into this ideology. When you're working with a therapist, you may be working with a therapist who's trying to kind of push that lens on you, so we have to watch out for that. I actually experienced this problem way before this even became a problem, because I realized every therapist, has a certain skill set, they have a certain worldview, perceptions, and they will try and push that on you based on their own mindset, so we have to kind of, choosing a therapist is a really important task, and it's something that we really have to follow our own intuition about and also try things out, For me, I personally wouldn't work with anyone, even the astrologer that I work with, I wouldn't work with someone who bought into this official story to the extent of telling me that, white people are evil and
are racist by design.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can't work with anyone because I want them to have a more objective worldview. And the moment that they actually have that, they actually take a position, and that's kind of the thing we're dealing with right now. Just to kind of lead into what we're speaking about is that we have, in my opinion, we have a therapy crisis going on, meaning a lot of people need mental health support right now. Never mind, a lot of people can't afford it. But on top of that, we have a lot of therapists who have bought into this ideology. And personally, I don't think it helps people. It didn't help me at any stage in my journey. It just kept me feeling more identified as a victim. I imagine people listening to this podcast don't either buy into this ideology, so we have to make sure that, feel people out. A lot of therapists actually have Instagrams now. They have, you can check out their website. You can kind of see what they're about, you can kind of feel into it. So it's important we actually also do some degree of research, And the main thing we're looking for, I think for me, is someone, they don't have to agree with us on everything. That's fine, but we want them to be able to see us and to call us out. That's who I want to work with, at least.
Yeah. The way I see it, it's a bit, maybe again, a bit radical, but, a lot of people's true colors are being exposed right now with the splitting. as I mentioned before, even popular spiritual leaders, even popular teachers whose modalities we apply, but they're completely buy into the official story, even COVID, and not questioning any of it, not questioning the vaccines, even promoting it, all of that.
Yeah.
Zero questioning.
Just as a side note, though, I just remember Gabor Mate officially was like, I don't think this is, I was on a call with him for Compassion and Inquiry, and he was like, I actually don't think it's as big a deal as they're making it out to be. And then what happened is people lost it on the call on him. Yeah. And I don't think he's ever spoken about it again. So even people who may have, he's a medical doctor, by the way. So that gives him more credibility. But what I'm saying is that a lot of people are also scared to speak out because of the backlash. So they keep their opinions to themselves. And I think to a certain extent that can be wise for some people.
Which goes back to, again, goes back to external consideration, strategic enclosure.
Yeah.
But this can be abused as well, these concepts, I feel, and then not to speak out because you're too afraid of, my profession, my success, my clients, my bank account.
Exactly.
My career, my public image and all of that. I don't want to deal with this. I just go along with it.
Yeah.
Right? So there are those people, but a lot of people truly, sincerely believe the lies. And that shows me, I don't care how successful or popular, these teachers or therapists are, it shows their lack of deeper self-work. Because from the way I see, the deeper I dive into myself, confronting essentially the lies within myself, my conditioning, wounding, and my ego structure and all of that, the more I connect to essence, the more I see the lies externally in the world.
Yeah.
Right? It's because it's interrelated, the inner and outer process.
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand. But especially in this day and age, and that's, we have done in our courses, we really combine the inner and outer work. So that's very important to engaging in the inner work, but putting into a context what's happening in the world, and supporting people, because a lot of people are alone. They're losing their friends and family to this agenda and whatnot.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do. They don't know how to approach, or like we said, even don't know how to help them because they're so, excuse the word, but brainwashed into this agenda. It's a full-on mind control program based on the mainstream news or the pharmaceutical mafia cartel in all of that, and they buy the fear program.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really hard to pierce through that.
I think also you touched on another important issue, and this is something I only recommend to people who have the psychological and emotional and even spiritual and physical strength to do it, is one way we can help others during these times is to, in this age of crazy censorship, we have to not be afraid to speak our truth and to speak up for what we believe in, because this is what we're dealing with, we're dealing with this kind of collective consensus state, which is acting in a way that it threatens anyone who has an alternative. Even conservatives are being censored, So one way we can actually help others is by showing them that we're not afraid to speak out. We're not afraid to speak our mind, even if it goes against the status quo. But I only really also recommend that to people who can handle it, because you're entering into the arena, you're gonna get people who are gonna get triggered. They're gonna call you all sorts of nasty names. Like, I had to burn through like the fire of projections last year through speaking out. And actually it made me stronger because I used it for spiritual self-work. And now I definitely give less of a shit what people think of me. I know who I am. I know that I have the right to speak up for what I believe in. And those are really valuable lessons, and we can learn lessons through learning how to speak up for ourselves, because a lot of us have learned to be silent, to not speak up for ourselves. It can be also part of our conditioning. So we have to learn that. We have to learn that, just because there's a lot of really, people who support censorship and who will go out there and attack us, it doesn't take away that basic human right we have. So it's really important in these days of censorship that we're still not afraid to speak up for what we believe in. This is a fundamental human right. Facebook, Twitter, whatever, can't take it away from us. We always have that right, but a lot of us are not exercising it because we're scared of what people may think. And This actually relates to what you kind of touched on, is what you can even see in your own Aquarius soul journey, is the individuation process is really key. So before you help others, do you know who you are? Do you know what you value? Do you know what you stand for? We need to really develop that sense of our values too. because this is what's going to help give us strength when we speak up in the voice of opposition, you know? And at the same time, too, you know, we need to be able to handle people's questions about our values. If our values cannot stand up to people asking us deeper questions about it, then we need to also examine where our values go back, which is also a process I had to go through in the past year, because I had people call me like a Republican, conservative, white supremacist, all these nasty names, you know? But I actually thought about it and was like, what are my, where do my beliefs land on the political spectrum? And actually, technically, I'm more left of center, generally speaking.
The original left of center.
Yeah, and I'm left of center, but more on the libertarian, more than the authoritarian side of the spectrum. So actually, through people calling me really awful names, I was forced to examine my own beliefs. Again, this is a development of humility. I was like, am I a conservative? Am I Republican? I read up about the basic, you know, beliefs of them. And I was like, no, I'm not actually, but that's what they think. And it helped me see that this is just an ad hominem attack that they'd assign to anyone. You know, I was complaining about censorship on Instagram and someone came out and said, oh, good to know you're a white supremacist.
Exactly.
Like, false correlation. But see, like what I'm saying is that, you know, if we don't actually exercise these rights, if we don't speak up for what we believe in, you know, we'll never know. We'll never actually know what we value because we haven't ever given it a chance. And it actually is part of the process to be able to handle even attacks or feedback or criticism, you know, from others so that we can discover more of what we actually believe in, you know, and that's how we develop humility. At the same time, you know, the opposite house of the sixth house is the 12th house, which is about, you know, the more spiritual, etheric realms. A lot of other crazy stuff goes in there. But it's about the path of spirituality. So, you know, we also have to have a sense of boundaries around that and not fall into blind compassion at the same time. And again, it leads back to the process of discrimination, you know. So as you desire to improve yourself, you start to discriminate between what information is useful and what information is not useful for you improving yourself.
Even for yourself, exactly. Because we can easily get lost in the information war as well, or information overload in this day and age. And it goes back to the question, how can I help the world during these times, is to stepping into your power. And because, as you just mentioned there, it's about understanding how the matrix really works. And it's through the fear frequency to install fear, right? All the cancel culture, the deplatforming, the attacks, you know, is to install fear in you so you don't speak out, because otherwise you will get canceled, you lose your job, you lose your friends, you lose this and this, you will be, crucified, so to speak, and made an example of. This is what they try to install with you, right? They really, so it's literally not buying into the fear, but acting with courage again. We need this courage. And courage is also expression of essence. That's really what it comes down to.
Yes.
Coming back to
strength.
Essence, you know, to really, because essence only cares about what's true. You know, the personality cares about, oh, is this good for me or bad for me?
Yeah.
Right? The external the external shell, so to speak, you know?
Yeah.
You want to say something?
No.
But, so what I was trying to get at is that we don't, for example, I just got released again from Facebook jail. I was in Facebook jail again for over a week because why? I simply shared my personal experience of wearing a mask, which just feels completely off from an embodied perspective, and I pointed out the issues of masks, the fact that there has never been true scientific proof that they actually work.
Yeah.
That's even like putting children on masks, it ties into a trauma installment program and all of that. But just for voicing this opinion, I got censored, put in Facebook jail again. But we must not let this deter us. At some point, I'm going to be externally considered in the sense of like, I realize, okay, more sensitive information, I'm just going to share on our Telegram account for now and whatnot, right?
Exactly.
But I will never be silenced.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Speaking personally as well, I posted something about vaccines today and how the COVID vaccine is not technically a vaccine. It's actually a piece of biotechnology. It operates much differently to a vaccine. It's not like they're giving you a little bit of the disease and you develop antibodies to it. It actually stimulates an immune response by implanting something into your fat cells. So it operates entirely differently. And so my point to make is I know when I post that, there's a potential I could get fact-checked or censored, even put in Facebook jail. But to me, it's actually important to it actually aligns with my own values and what I've learned And what I value, and this is my whole life as well, is holistic health. I've been through the pharmaceutical regime like majority of my life, and it didn't work for me. In fact, it just left me more frustrated, more traumatized, and more out of body. And which is why I'm such an advocate for holistic health, because I've actually seen it work for me. It's the only thing that's actually worked for me is holistic healing modalities. So, and I know this path is not for everyone, I know that for some people, who are if someone is very sick, maybe very overweight, is taking several medications already, it's not like I'm going to just tell them, oh, hey, just do yoga and meditate and do some compassion inquiry, maybe you'll be fine. It works for people at a certain level, usually people who have been so frustrated with the Western medical model that they start coming to me or some other unconventional, coach or therapist. So I also acknowledge that this is my own unique path, but what I'm saying is that we cannot be afraid of the censorship or the backlash. We cannot let that deter us from speaking out once we know what our values are, because it's actually living a life in integrity means living a life in alignment with your true values. And that's the divide that people have is they've woken up, they have a different perception of the world than they had before, and yet their life still reflects their old values,
Yeah. And I think the true values, what we stand for is essentially deeply connected to essence, to truth.
Yeah.
Right? To essence, meaning your true self, your psychic being, whatever you may want to call it, not the personality you identify with, not the beliefs and whatnot, but that's deep inside. That's why, again, once you do this deeper inner work, you automatically also develop conscience, right? A lot of people have not even ability to access conscience, true conscience. They're just programmed, which is just very diminished, is suppressed within themselves. So a lot of people just go along with it because they have no sense of conscience, of something deeper, of what's right and what's wrong, so to speak. Not from an ego perspective of the superficial judgment, but coming from essence, right? Of deeper values, of standing up for freedom, right? Of individual rights and all of that, and not imposing onto others.
Yeah.
Right? But going back, little towards the end of the first hour.
Were you going to ask something?
No, I just want to mention one aspect in terms of helping others. What we mentioned at the beginning, it's again about respecting free will, right? And so we have to respect other people's free will if they don't sincerely ask, if they want to hear the truth, right?
Yeah.
And we need to even respect other people's free will to stay asleep, so to speak.
Yes.
Right? This is where they're at. And they need to come to terms in their own way in some point in their journey.
Yeah. And then asking yourself, if you're at that turning point and you're not happy with what you're doing, maybe you are and you're just curious on how to help others, you can help others the most by the frequency that you embody, like by your emotional energy, by your presence, by your connection to your true self. If you're just wanting to do that casually, that's the best way you can help others. It's just being that compassionate witness in your friend group, in your relationships, in your community, and holding that space for people. That's what people are looking for right now. They want someone who's very good at regulating their own nervous system and can be a source of refuge for them. Because in a world of fear, if you're a well-regulated person, i.e. you've dealt with your traumas, you're connected to your body, when you're out of whack, you know how to deal with that, then people are automatically going to gravitate towards you, and they're going to be healed by you. And so that's in the casual context. But then for people who actually want to step into their power and they want to become coaches or, therapists or whatever it is, the modality that they're working on, the first thing to do is look at yourself, look at your own gifts, look at what you're passionate about. What are the healing modalities that have really helped you as well? And then as well, for me, an important step was developing my own skill set. There's a lot of people out there who can be like, I can remove your entities for $600 and but they learned from some alien who downloaded the information. For me, that doesn't work for me. Maybe that works for some people, but for me, learning a valuable skill set that actually worked was huge for me. That actually gave me confidence, because again, it's about the apprenticeship. So same for you. I'm sure when you were doing body work, after you went to Esalen, you learned all these different techniques. You had that confidence to be of service to others. You knew you had a skill set to bring to the table. So that's one important thing to develop is your passions along with your skill set. And that's how you make the jump. And I can just speak from personal experience. It doesn't go from A to Z. you start by doing whatever it is you're good at, and then you expand as you go along the way, and you develop different tools, so it's always this process of development and becoming better at what you do,
and it's deeply interlinked, with not just, as you mentioned, learning skill sets and keep learning, but your inner development, your inner self-work, which is an ongoing journey. I'm still doing basic shadow work. What I've realized over these years, especially with my work, I get very much, as readers know, into the fringe hyperdimensional matrix entities, the occult and all of that.
Yeah.
I've mentioned many times before, but I see a lot of people getting into all this fringe knowledge and trying to get entities removed left and right. But many of them don't work on their basic childhood wounding, on their basic shadow projections or shadow work, right?
And
basic trauma, basic wounding, the entry points where actually these forces and entities can come in. So it's really about having more foundational, practical approach to these days. And one key thing in this day and age, as you mentioned as well, is learn how to regulate your nervous system.
Yes,
on that basic level,
key.
even as a foundation, because that's how you affect the world, because we are frequency anchors. We affect others more based on our level of being, than just by sharing information alone. Because we live on the illusion still, we see the outside separate from our inner being, but it's all interrelated.
Yeah, like if you're working with someone or you have a friend, and they're coming to you for consolation, if you just verbally tell them it's going to be okay and tell them, words that will make them feel better, that's actually not going to calm them down. But what will calm them down and will give the capacity for healing to happen is if you're in a calm, centered, embodied place yourself and you're connected to the self. That's really the main recipe you need underlying all of these healing modalities. Every good therapist, every good coach out there is good because they're able to both regulate themselves, and that leads to connection to the self. All healing happens in the presence of that. So that's the quality we want to develop within ourselves, So even when I, see people, I was researching astrologers recently to work with, if I didn't feel like a certain amount of embodied presence from them, doesn't matter how much information they have, like I didn't personally feel drawn to work with them, like I have a few Scorpio planets, so I actually crave depth. I crave someone who's been through some stuff, So that's what we want to develop basically is the end goal of our own healing journey is having that relationship with the self and being being consistent with that.
Yeah. And this also the humility aspect, I feel, ties into realizing that in the end, we're not quote unquote in control of this. Right? There's other bigger forces happening based on, negative and also positive divine forces. There's an evolutionary process we just need to align ourselves with, which also means we're not able to, watch for the ego, trying to help everyone, trying to save everyone. Also realizing even if you do this in your own work and come to realize, I can help with my own gifts and modalities, know that first thing that your work is definitely going to not be for everyone.
Yeah.
We know that our work is not for everyone, right?
That's a lesson in humility again.
It's a lesson in humility,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's just for a specific type of person, and based on our own gifts and whatnot. So we're not trying to impose ourselves on others. If this doesn't work for you, I wish you all the best.
Exactly.
Find something that works for you.
Yeah, and it's important we were able to spot that, which maybe we can talk a little bit more in the second hour, because it's important that we actually are able to spot the people that we can help and the people who we may not be able to help, and that's that discernment that needs to be developed.
Which goes back to level external consideration, really being able to perceive and see others.
Yes, exactly. So we'll get more into that in the second hour.
Exactly.
And what else did we want to talk about?
I want to touch upon what you just briefly mentioned, the importance of the process of individualization, the process of soul individualization, which also ties in the Jungian process of individuation, to become a true individual, to separate from the crowd hive mind mentality, which also ties into the more deeper esoteric topic of organic portals, so-called quote-unquote soulless humans that are just connected to soul pool but don't have yet an individual soul, and how this plays out in the collective right now. So I really want to talk about that, because yes, we're all one from a much bigger perspective, but we're not all the same, which also ties into the topic of equality, which the left is pushing, which there's also something to be questioned about, the issue of equality from an occult esoteric perspective. And I want to touch a bit about what you also mentioned on the vaccine. There was a really excellent video by Dr. Simone Gold, The Truth About COVID-19 and the COVID-19 Vaccine, which I highly recommend for people to check out. We posted it on our forum and also on our Telegram channel. And go deeper into all of these topics in the second hour. Again, if you're not a member yet and want access to the second hour, please go to my website, veilofreality.com. You can sign up there. You will have access to all the second hours of all podcasts, including the membership forum.
And you can also just become a member to support us in our work.
We would appreciate this very much. And we also have a Telegram channel now going as well, which we will post in the show notes, the link as well, because a lot of the stuff we cannot, or I post on Facebook and then I get just post deleted and put it to Facebook jail. So with that, having said that, see you guys in the second hour.